Let's Get To presents Go Go Astros, a focus on H-Town hardball.
And welcome to Go Astros. I'm your host, James Christopher. I've got Brian Arbor and Andy Tom Chesson. And the one thing that the three of us have in common is we all have better beards than Chris Woodward. First of all, before I know we never talk Arlington on this show, but guys, what was he thinking with that comment? First of all, that wasn't even statistically correct.
Oh, look, if you get schooled in math by Aaron Boone.
Andy?
The issue, as I did tweet out yesterday, so I hate to repeat because I know I have so many crossover followers on the show, but when you spend $500 million and your record is exactly the same as it was after 26 games as last year, the cracks starting to show. The pressure is starting to mount a little bit on Chris Woodward, because I guarantee you the Rangers ownership group, no matter how understanding and this is a long-term plan, they come across as, why aren't you winning? We gave you Corey Seager. You have Corey Seager, you should be winning games. And they're not winning games. They're 11-15, just like they were last year. And they don't look like they're appreciably better last year based on what they showed us in Houston so far this year.
It does feel like
I'm sorry, that was in Arlington.
The
parks look so similar, I couldn't tell.
The Astros stole signs. They stole a whole damn ballpark. It does feel like Chris Woodward isn't the guy. He's the guy before the guy. The minute they start to look, what's that?
He's Art Howe for the
Art Howe, yeah.
He's Bo Porter.
He's Bo Porter, but even better analogy. One of the cool things, though, is that since we've last recorded, the Astros have not lost a game. 7 straight. And I know people are complaining about the offensive output, but for me, this felt like watching baseball when I grew up. Like, I love a 3-2 game. But it just felt like even early compared to earlier in the season, winning games that either they would have lost earlier this season or last year. That was my big takeaway. Brian, when you want to go first on that?
Yeah, I mean, they had a poor record in one-run games, particularly against they were 1-4 against the Blue Jays. They lost that one-run game against the Diamondbacks, and they've evened it out and actually gotten a little bit ahead on that. So, we talked about this before. One-run games are mostly luck. Don't think they're going to do this week, though. I'm going to do the exact same things this week as I did last week, just in case. But, what's really, they've done a great job of, particularly in the last week, but really throughout the season, is preventing runs. They've got really good starts from all of their pitchers, and their defense has been outstanding.
Yeah, Andy, all of the pitching has just been dynamic and clutch. I would have preferred, if I'm going to nitpick, I would have preferred Javier just finish yesterday, but overall, just the pitching the last 7 days.
Well, it's been outstanding, and that's if the offense could come around, you have not from a name level, but you have a chance to be as good a pitching staff as we were in 2019, and we really haven't seen that level of pitching up and down the rotation and the bullpen since 2019. But you're right, it's really hard to nitpick a 7-0 homestand. This is the first homestand we have swept of 7 games or more in 19 years as a franchise. So this is finding fault in this homestand. I know that's part of what we do, but there's not a whole lot of fault to be found, other than the Astros as a team still are a little bit below middle of the pack as far as offense goes.
One of the things, too, I want to do a shout out to San Antonio Tim. Used to be formerly known as the Twitter account, formerly known as Round Rock Tim. He gave us a really big compliment. I don't know how many of you guys saw it, and it's kind of what's been the sort of overall assessment of our show is that we are not overly emotional. There's a scale of emotion on this call right now, probably me being the most, but we're not knee jerky. And I think we take a very logical approach, so first of all, thank you for that compliment. But Brian, I know you did a deep dive and a logical deep dive into just what one of the big factors that has made the team so special, particularly over the last 7 days.
Yeah, and that has been the Astros defense. And this was a big strength of the team last season. And there were a couple questions we could ask about the defense going into this season. One is, Carlos Correa won the Platinum Glove last year, and that seemed pretty close to shocking for a Gold Glove, Platinum Glove decision. That seemed to be the right decision. Seemed to be fairly given. He's going to be replaced by Jeremy Pena, who had very good reports on his defense, but is a rookie. And with a couple guys like Altuve and Brantley and Yuli Gurriel, you have people with pretty good defensive numbers, but they're getting a little bit older. And early numbers, it's a month. Defensive metrics are not the best thing, but early returns are that the Astros defense remains among the top handful of defenses in the major leagues. And a big reason for that is Jeremy Pena has stepped up and is already one of the best defenders in Major League Baseball. And he's ranked top 10 in, I think, 3 of the 4 major defensive categories that I look at. Fielding runs above average, outs above average, and defensive runs saved above average. So he's been basically they've not missed a beat at shortstop despite, losing the Platinum Glove winner.
Andy, overall, what have you seen from the Astros throwing the leather around? Kyle Tucker robbing a home run yesterday.
You have superior defense at all of the infield positions, which I think is important. Even Jose Siri, who I don't have a great love for, and I think we've discussed that, has played a competent center field so far. He hasn't run into anybody. He hasn't dropped any obvious fly balls. And he did those things last year, and he did them in high situations. So that's an improvement. He and McCormick are a acceptable defensive center field. So you've got Maldonado, you've got Altuve, you've got a center fielder or center field tandem, and you've got Pena, who, as we all discussed, was major league ready last year from a defensive standpoint. His surprise has been on the offensive side, where he's got an 800 OPS, leading all rookies with 6 home runs so far this year. That's the key to winning games. If you remember back, and I know this is going to go back before some of our listeners or viewers remember, the difference between the 96 and the 97 teams was Chucky Carr, because they signed a center fielder who could actually play center field, and that solidified the defense for the Astros and allowed them to win the division in 97 for the first time in forever, since I guess 86. And that's what you have to have if you're not going to hit. You've got to have great pitching, and you've got to have defense to support that pitching. And the defense and pitching goes hand in hand, right? Our pitching is as good as it is because the defense is playing so well.
Yeah, and I think what I like about the team, and we talked about this before the season started, that this would probably be the strength of the team as opposed to in other years where it had been the bats. And I like this sort of mode of Astros baseball because pitching and defense travel and offense doesn't always travel. And I love the idea that you can actually rely on certain things for the most part, game to game.
Yeah. I mean, if Framber Valdez is a very good pitcher because he has had Carlos Correa and Alex Bregman on the left side of the infield. And now he has Jeremy Pena and Alex Bregman on the left side of the infield. If he has lesser defenders, he's not a major league starter, because I don't think his specialty is the ground ball. At a rate, I think 10 points higher than the next best ground ball pitcher in Major League Baseball right now. He's not that guy without the defense behind him. So those two things are symbiotic, and that's what's making this team win right now. That's what's carrying this team through what appears to be, maybe it's not a prolonged offensive slump. Maybe that's just who this team is in what appears to be kind of a dead ball era of baseball, relatively.
Brian, Ryan Presley had 2 appearances over the weekend. The internet made a lot of the blown save. I didn't feel one way or the other about it. I felt like that had to do with rust than necessarily stuff. But I think, you look at things differently. Overall, what were your impressions of the Astros closer?
Yeah, his curveball was a lot better on Saturday than it was on Thursday. Now, this is the nitpicking of the nitpicking, right? That we are at, he threw what? All told, less than 40 pitches between the two of them. He threw, I think, 10 curveballs, but he threw that middle hanging curveball that Candelario hit. It seemed 5,000 feet in the top of the ninth. But hey, good job picking him up. Good job by the rest team picking him and Yordan Alvarez up in the bottom half of that inning. And part of that was, so I don't know how much Thursday was. He was rusty, or kind of what he said after the game, which he just threw a really terrible pitch. Now he threw some other curveballs that weren't as good, but again, got the last out on a really good curveball on Saturday. So hopefully that's where he's moving in the future.
Do we know how many rehab appearances he had? Was it just the one?
Just the one, and it was
So
only
that he threw 6 pitches.
6 pitches. Yeah.
So regardless, it was a bad pitch, and yes, you should own up to it when you're making the millions of dollars that he's making.
Mhm.
But the reality is, he threw 6 pitches against live bats
Right.
in a rehab assignment, and he hadn't pitched in 15 days prior to that. So yeah, it's a little bit of rust, and I think he's a better pitcher when he is a little bit tired. I think there's a little bit more bite on his breaking stuff when he's when he doesn't have too much to give. Now, having said that, I think the internet, and we even had a little back and forth about his velocity. His velocity is not where it was last year. Is that something that comes back? Because it's about a mile per hour, mile and a half less than it has been in years past. So is that something he builds up to and kind of a prolonged spring training effect, or is there something else going on? Because he has had a history when his knees don't feel good of not being as effective. And he's already been on the DL once, having fluid drained off the knee.
Yeah, certainly the hope was that the IL stint would get him healthy and that was the cause of the decline in velocity. We still may see it pick up here this week, but if it doesn't start getting up to 94, 95 this week, then we can officially worry, whatever that means.
Yeah.
But one of the things that has been super impressive, and if you start thinking about the trade deadline, this is a really good sign, I think, because the bullpen, I mean, they used 2 or 3 guys to close. It didn't seem to phase anybody. Everybody kind of, even if like Montero wasn't super sharp in one of those outings, but still rebounded. Andy, it's nice to have that be a strength as opposed to, remember last year, it was always like, what's going to happen to the bullpen? What's going to happen to the bullpen?
Well, Montero's closed games in the major leagues, and he is what looks to me, the layman, as effectively wild in the strike zone. So he doesn't throw the ball where you're expecting it to be, and that makes his stuff, which is really, really good, travel a lot better. You have Hector Neris, who has been really, really good with the Astros so far, who I think has also closed games for the Phillies in the past.
And all you James Click haters, signed by James Click.
Right. Sorry, Pedro Baez didn't work out. That's part of the crapshoot of Major League Baseball bullpen signings. But yeah, you've got 2 or 3 guys that can be the guy, and I'm not even talking about Ryan Stanek, who'd closed games for us a little bit last year as well. So you've got options, and I think that's a better situation than having to depend solely on hoping you get to Presley with a lead and hoping he can hold it, which he's done very well in his career with the Astros. I don't want to belittle that, but if you've got options, if you've got matchups that work better for you, you now have the ability to do that.
Brian, let's say McCullers is back. Mid-season is what seems to be the projection for as good as that is. That means another arm to the bullpen, right? Who do you see as being the other arm going to the bullpen?
Well, the first thing I'll say about that is this is a problem, but a good problem for a baseball team to have, that they have too many healthy starting pitchers. And the key word I'm using there is healthy, right? Because will we have 7 healthy starting pitchers when McCullers returns? I don't know. That's a long way to plan for pitching health. So right now, yesterday, they used Javier in the bullpen because they didn't want to put a 7th day of rest, particularly on like Justin Verlander, who's very much a creature of habit, and he'll go tomorrow in Minnesota against Joe Ryan, who also has a really good fastball. It'll be a nice matchup between the 2 of them. Javier is their most flexible guy. He's done both of these. He clearly has the talent to be a major league starting pitcher. I'm sure in Javier's head, he's like, had I come up with the Pirates, I probably wouldn't know how to pitch, but I could always start.
Right.
At least get a chance to sort of show that. But right now, they'll have to figure that out and deal with it. But that's, to me, that's
it
so
seems
far
like
away.
The candidates, Andy, would be Luis Garcia, Jose Urquidy, or Framber Valdez when McCullers comes back. I'm doing the math correct, right? Like,
yeah.
If, like you said, Brian, if everybody's healthy.
Well, I mean, I don't assume the Astros are going to stay with a 6-man rotation the entire year either. I think it's a necessity out of this 33 games and 33 or 34 day stretch that we're in the middle of. So at some point you've got to shed 2 starters, and I don't mean shed as get rid of, but find other things for them to do. Javier,
and not like Luke Gregerson working in the pro shop. We don't mean that.
Javier has the curse of being flexible. He just does. Odorizzi would be the candidate before the year, and yes, he's had 3 great starts in a row. He's still going to be the punching bag for most of the fandom, just because he's not an Astros guy, hasn't been historically. So
I love his press conferences, though. He is honest.
But you can't throw him in the bullpen because he's just not effective. He's never shown to be effective coming out of the bullpen. Javier has been and can be and is effective out of the bullpen. So it's sad for him. It's good for the team. And I think in the confines of a season, players don't get bogged down necessarily with what their role is from a career perspective. I don't think Javier's sitting there going, boy, if I started more games, my next contract would be better. Now, do they do that in the off season? 100%.
Yeah.
But during the confines of the season, I really believe that most successful major leaguers are, what does it take for this team to win right now? Okay, that's what I'll do. And the ones who don't do that, frankly, don't last long in franchises anyway. And I don't think Javier has that reputation with the Astros by any means. So it'll be interesting to see. I think ultimately they're going to have to make a deal with one of their starters because they're going to have a log jam, but I think that's a way down the road. And I don't think you can really count on Lance McCullers really coming back until you see him back.
Yeah, I mean, that is the truth. That's definitely the truth. One of the things, though, diving into Brian's defensive stats that he threw out and how good the pitching staff has been, is it looks like now maybe we can address the offense at the trade deadline as opposed to the pitching. I'm guessing that means center field if that's what we end up doing.
Or catcher.
But
Maldonado had the home run on Saturday, and that was great. But both he and I think Jason Castro entering yesterday's OPS plus was -5, and it's hard to have a negative on a thing scaled from 0 to 100.
And I think the candidate for that is Castro, because I think Verlander might shit a solid gold brick if they traded or got rid of Maldonado.
Yeah, and part of what's hard to say about catchers is they really value Maldonado's game calling, his leadership, his ability to sort of work with the pitching staff, to shepherd all these young pitchers, particularly these young starters, through their troubles. So it's hard for me as an outsider to value that, to say what the value of that is, and sort of if they just went with, if they traded for, I think Sean Murphy from the A's is probably going to be on the trade block. Maybe they go out and try to make a deal for him. What's the defensive difference between him and Maldonado? What's the difference in game calling? I don't know, but it clearly is offensively. They essentially have a pitching spot in the order so far. Hopefully these guys sort of level out, particularly Castro, who is supposed to be a better hitter than Maldonado. And,
that's why I think
so certainly there's time for that to come around.
Andy, that's why I think if one of those two is expendable, and we talked about Corey Lee, but Corey Lee's not really hitting either in AAA, so I don't know if that's the best thing for him. But it does seem like Castro is the guy brought in to hit. Maldonado, everything we get is like gravy from that guy. So is that where you're sitting as well? You think the catching spot?
Yeah, Corey Lee's interesting, just like any prospect would be interesting, because he's a guy that's younger and probably going to get better. And I think there would be some value for him shadowing Maldonado for half a season in Houston and learning how a pro carries himself and deals with the pitching staff and all those things. But I also think the Astros, in a window to win and still win big, I don't know that you can take that chance with what is essentially going to be 3 rookies in your lineup when Jake Myers comes back, if they don't address center field in the meantime. So I think, a veteran pickup in exchange for Castro is probably what you'd see later on, maybe. But I think it's the season's, we're 26 games in. So the season's still really young. Maldonado had another home run this weekend, and I guess he does that once every 3 weeks. We're good.
I just think
you're fine. Just keep catching the ball.
I just want to keep using the meme. That's all I care about.
Understand. If you follow Twitter, and you shouldn't because Twitter's horrible. They've put this wonderful thing in called communities. And what the one benefit I've seen is that there's something called Astros Twitter as a community, and all the dregs of Astros fandom have decided to congregate there instead of just populating random places. So the current talk is how Yuli Gurriel is garbage, and he's on the downward side of his career, and he needs to be dealt or just outright released.
Outright released.
Yeah, I mean, he won a batting title last year, so obviously this year
And a Gold Glove, right?
and a Gold Glove. He's the worst.
And did any of those people? Can you tell if those are cut and paste from what they tweeted in 2020?
I mean, they might be. I think some of the people are cut and paste, frankly.
I tell you what, though, if the Astros did DFA Yuli Gurriel, the other Astros fan I live with might have she might have some serious thoughts on that, because that is by far her favorite Astro.
I will tell you that if it happens, I'll take the blame, because my Space City jersey is a Gurriel model. And I have a Springer jersey. I don't have a Correa jersey, so I was hoping that would work, but didn't.
I retired my Correa jersey. It's off season. With Gurriel, one thing he's done less, he's walked less this year than he did last year. And one of his big improvements last year was to take more walks, to swing less out of the strike zone, to make sort of a clear improvement in that. He's regressed a little bit on that this week, but hey, on Thursday, he had that big walk, that long at bat against Gregory Soto that put McCormick at second base so he could score on the Tucker single. So hopefully he gets more at bats like that.
And maybe it's just pie in the sky for me, or I just want to believe in the guy, but he has bad stretches like every major league player does. Again, I think we're 26 games in, and if you had a 26 games stretch in the middle of the season where you were batting about 200, nobody would really notice it. It's just happening at the beginning of the season for him right now. So there's still a lot of time for him to pick up and be the hitter that he has been historically.
It's interesting what you said, though, Andy, about, Astros Twitter and like, I did not even check out that community because I knew what it would be. It seems like how some of the
exactly what it is.
It seems like how some of the Facebook groups we've all been in were like, wow, this is awful. But technically, not technically, the Astros are one game better than they were in 2019, the team that we all acknowledge was the best Astros team of all time.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's, I don't think that bears out, but at least the last 2 years, they're beating teams they're supposed to beat. And that wasn't always the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very confusing. And if you want to look at, the joke that we have is don't pay attention to batting average. And I think that's especially here's my Scott McIntyre reference for the week. Don't pay attention to batting average, ha, 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 ha. But it's kind of, you look at Yordan Alvarez, who everybody is, I'd say he's having a good opening to the season. He's got a 957 OPS. His batting average is 256. Michael Brantley, who is historically a 300 hitter, is batting 273. Pena is 242. Altuve is 259, although he's been on fire since he came back off the DL. There's just not big batting averages, and there's not that many players over 300 in baseball right now.
And that's actually something
batting average in the whole league is down 10 points. So just take that off everybody.
And, Andy, that's actually something we're going to talk about on our other show about just when will the game change? Because I do think the dead ball is here to stay. I think that Major League Baseball is looking down the road and saying a game more like what we grew up with is actually more exciting than sitting around waiting for the ball to leave whatever little league park you're playing in. All 26 of them, Chris Woodward. But
percentages are hard.
They really, really are. I don't know why I expected math out of that city or region, but I did. So
they don't do science or biology either, so
they really don't. But one of the things I did want to bring up when it came to Yordan, and it goes back to what Brian said earlier, he seems like he's playing a lot more left field, and it's not a story anymore. Remember, it was a story before. Right. He's in left field. What's gonna happen? Brian, what have you seen out of him playing left field that tells you, or does it tell you anything?
Yeah, I mean, so in 2019, they didn't want to play him much in left field because, hey, you're a rookie, you're starting, just hit the ball, do the thing you do well. And we're fine with what we've got in the field. We don't need that. Last year was a big story because he's coming off the double knee surgery in 2020. He had the 2 games in 2020. And so, are his knees okay? Is this something? And the answer is yes, that he is not, if you go look at Jordan's StatCast page, it's red for everything except sprint speed. He's not a fast guy, but he does everything else well. But he has played a competent and basically league average left field. And if you can do that with hitting the ball that, the way that Jordan was born to do, then yeah, that's something you can do. You can rest Michael Brantley more often, and you can be a little bit more flexible in what you do with the DH spot. If you ever want to get Altuve or Gurriel a day at DH and rotate around differently that way, that'll work.
Go ahead, Andy. Sorry.
I think the other thing that we don't talk about enough is that something else happened. The Astros organization didn't get a lot of credit for, not on the pitching mound, is they developed him into a competent left fielder. Because the reason it was such a big story when he first came up is because he was really horrible in the minor leagues. It wasn't like they were just shy completely about playing him there. He was really, really bad. He was bad at first base. They put him in left field. He was bad at left field. And so he became kind of a dedicated DH in AA and AAA. And that was during the whole, why can't we call this guy up? He's batting 5,000 and he's already got 102 home runs in 3 games. It's incredible. And when he first came up, he was very timid, and the knees, I'm sure, were an issue, but they've developed him into a competent left fielder. And baseball is one of those great games where a guy like Greg Wazinski, who is much slower than Jordan Alvarez, who has a much worse arm than Jordan Alvarez had, could play a competent left field for championship level baseball teams. Jordan Alvarez is a much better player than that kind of player, or a Rob Deere, or a number of guys who were in the lineup for our bats before there was a DH rule. So it's, credit to the Astros for actually coaching him up and getting more out of him than he probably brought to the table when he first came up.
I mean, to the
point.
point.
I know a big difference between the Astros and the Rangers. It's that when the Rangers have brought guys up from AAA, they've not developed them or improved them.
Yep.
And Willie Calhoun down last week, who's kind of like Jordan Alvarez. He's a hit first prospect who you can wear a glove in the field. He is not developed either as a hitter or as a fielder. He's probably going to get traded to some other organization, and that'll be a sort of best help. And it speaks to, again, hey, what have the Astros done well? They brought these guys up, and none had been like Jared Kelenic, who you start looking at him and they're like, this was a top 10 prospect in baseball, but can he actually hack it in Major League Baseball? You don't have any of those questions about many Astros prospects. They've been really good at not only developing guys in the minors, but continuing to develop in the majors.
Right. I mean, and you're right to the whole development thing. I mean, it's almost as if Tom Herman is in charge of managing and developing talent in Texas.
I just hope there isn't a chart about what color your urine is in the Astros clubhouse.
Bad teammate.
I actually literally missed that because I remember going, oh, look, I'm being at a championship level today. Last question, and it's also a Jordan Alvarez.
That's color, not volume.
It's not, and hopefully not stream strength because I'm in my 40s. But Andy, a lot was made out of Alvarez not running it out. And I think it actually goes back to everyone, including me at home, thought that was gone off the bat. It goes back to the dead ball, but I don't think it's this like level of issue on the man's character like it seems to be, like little league coaches are making it out to be.
No, but I think both things can be true, because even Alvarez, after he didn't run out to first base, said, I screwed up when he came back to the dugout. And Dusty Baker, to his credit, said, you did, don't do it again.
Right.
And that's the end of the conversation, or it should be. If he does it all the time, yeah, that's a problem. But yes, he thought it was out. But we teach kids at the earliest level that even if you think it's out, don't stand there and stare at it. It costs nothing because it worked out. We won the game. The next batter was walked. The McCormick, who represented Alvarez, ended up on second base with no outs anyway. So it all worked out. So yes, he thought the ball was out. And if we weren't playing with a deadened ball, it would have been out. But at the same time, he should at least hustled to first base and watched it from there, because even then he would have ended up on second. So I think both things can be true. I don't think it's a crime or a stain on his soul like some of Twitter wanted it to be. but he did screw up, and it's okay because we all screw up. Just don't do it again. When it becomes a habit, that's when it's an issue.
Brian, thoughts on that?
Yeah. Andy said it well. And the important thing is Jordan knew he screwed up immediately. Admitted that to his manager, and was not a big deal, both because Jordan knew what it was and because, well, one advantage of having a manager that's won 2,000 games is he's seen this before. He knows that it's a deal, but not a big deal unless he makes it a big deal. And there's no reason for him to do that in large part because his player knew what he did. And, that's all that matters. And yeah, Andy's right.
And
I'll
I think
do it again.
Could we isolate that? Andy's right.
That'll be the new bumper for the show.
That'd be nice.
No, I think Andy wants to bring it home in his next argument with his wife.
Absolutely. The other thing is, from Dusty Baker's standpoint, and we give him a lot of criticism, or we pay a lot of attention to Dusty. Dusty had not the best reputation as being a hustle guy when he was a player for a while. He was a great hitter, but I don't want to run that out. And so I think he can see himself. His strength is being a player's manager. So I think he would understand if it was a player that needed to be really beat up against a wall about doing something like that versus a guy like Jordan, who's very thoughtful, fairly quiet, keeps to himself, and really introspective. I know he looks like this big.
So you just described him as a serial killer.
But no, that would be different. He was quiet and he kept to himself.
He kept to himself.
That's right. Do you think he killed those guys? Oh, absolutely. That's all they ever talked about. But I think Dusty is, for this instance, was the right manager for that situation, because there's other guys. Buck Showalter would have lost his mind. Tony La Russa would have thrown him out of the park for a couple of days.
Yeah.
That's not what Jordan needed in that moment.
And Chris Woodward would have complained about the dimensions of the park. So, Dusty's the right manager for this.
And we're back full circle. For those of you who are listening and not watching, you can see that for 30 minutes, Quint has been going in full circle, chasing her tail underneath the table. Come here, baby.
As has our commentary, apparently.
Apparently it has. All right, let's say goodbye.
The show is attractive.
It does wrap. Yeah, it does. It does wrap up this episode of Go Astros. We'll be back next week after 6 games have happened. Go Astros.
Go Astros.
Only in 99% of the parks.
Go Astros is a presentation from Twitchy Dolphin Media and part of the Let's Get To Baseball Network.